Ksante, definitely one of the weakest front lines in the game right now. We're trying to give him a little less downtime where he's not in that tanky stance. So the mana is going to go from 60 to 40, and he'll slap back a little harder. We're not expecting this to open up like some weird AD build or anything like that.
You serious?
So in the next patch 13.24, ksante is getting huge buffs. So of course I've cooked up yet another spicy comp. And this comp is insanely fun to play because ksante just claps the enemy units really hard with both the astronomical 800% AD scaling and that incredibly low mana cost ult. But that's not all. Ksante can also get up to 96% damage reduction during his ult channel. So by the end of this video, you'll also see how wrong Mortdog was about AD Ksante. But what single comp enables Ksante the most? What are his best in-slot items, and will this comp cost Mortdog $500? But before we get into that, I'd like to thank you guys for the insane reception I've been getting on these recent few videos I've made. There's so many positive comments and it makes my day seeing each and every one of them. So from the bottom of my heart, thank you. But now, let's get into the video. So let's start off by looking more closely at Ksante's ratios. As I mentioned, he has a whopping 800% AD ratio, but something that's equally as insane is that damage reduction that scales off AP. Now, this is bonkers because Ksante is a Sentinel, so his damage reduction makes him considerably more tanky. For example, at 6 Sentinel and with a fully stacked Titans, Ksante would have 180 armor and MR, which reduces all incoming damage by 64%. But then, if Ksante ults, he further reduces that damage by 75%, meaning that overall, Ksante during his ult channel is only taking 9% damage. 9% as a 1 cost unit, with a 40 mana cost ult and a 2.5 second channel duration. That's insane. And then Ksante just proceeds to clap the enemy unit. Anyway, like Garen Reroll, you want to invest heavily into Sentinel and chase the trait as deep as you can. But how much AP does Ksante need to hit that max damage reduction of 75%? Well, that is 180 AP. But of course, you also want to prioritize giving Ksante AD for the huge burst damage and some Omnivamp so he can heal for those huge damage amounts. But which items give Ksante both AP and AD? Well, that's where we stumble upon the two items that you should always build on Ksante. Those items are Titan's Resolve and Hand of Justice. These two items are Ksante's core items as they satisfy three things. They give Ksante Omnivamp, they give Ksante AD, and Ksante can get enough AP to maximize his damage reduction. Titans will give 50 AD and AP at max stacks, and Hodge will alternate between either giving 15 or 30 AD AP each round. So from just two items each round, Ksante will have either 80% AD and AP plus 15% Omnivamp, or 65% AD and AP plus 30% Omnivamp. But remember that Ksante wants at most 180 AP, and anything beyond that is useless due to the cap on his damage reduction. Your final item on Ksante can be one of a few things. You could go BT for more Omnivamp and a shield that gives Ksante burst protection. You could give Ksante a second Hodge to guarantee that he's always above 180 AP and always have at least 30% Omnivamp. You could give him QSS for CC immunity if you feel like you need it. Hextech Gunblade is also a good healing alternative and it gives 10 AP. But there are some items that I've not tried but I think would be very good. One of which is Steadfast Heart, which can take Ksante to up to 90% damage reduction. This will mean that during his ult, Ksante will only take 3.6% damage. Alternatively, you could build more damage like with Giant Slayer so Ksante can get through those tanks and have at least 185 AP, or Infinity Edge for huge crit damage. Likewise, you could give him a Deathblade for loads of raw damage. But if you want to go more damage on Ksante, I would recommend Sterak's Gauge as it gives both raw HP and raw damage. Although I would say that if you're not giving Ksante more Omnivamp, then you may want to get more Omnivamp through Augments instead. Otherwise, Ksante won't be able to out-heal the damage he takes. Now, let's talk about CC for a second. Ksante's channel time is so long that he can effectively ignore the effects of some CC because the duration of that CC is shorter than Ksante's channel time. You will see this quite a lot during your games, but one thing to be aware of is that Ksante getting CC'd in between his casts is really detrimental because he isn't utilizing his damage reduction, so he takes far more damage than he usually would. But usually, with such a low mana cost ult, Ksante can just take some damage and then proceed to chain ult, deal loads of damage and keep healing. Also, redemption on an adjacent sentinel is amazing because of the extra damage reduction and healing for all of your sentinel units. Okay, now let's get to the juicy parts of this video, which are the comps you play around Ksante. Of course, 6 Sentinel is the goal, and you want a chosen Sentinel so you can open up the option of fielding 8 Sentinel should you get an emblem. But there's also many backline carries that synergize extremely well with such an amazing frontline, that being the newly buffed 4-cost units like Caitlyn or Ezreal. A comp you can play around either in the late game is this one, with an amazing backline that absolutely loves a beefy frontline. This backline will absolutely demolish anything in its way, although I prefer playing a variation of this where instead of 2 big shot 2 rapid fire, you just play 4 rapid fire. And the reason why I prefer this board is that even without items, these rapid fire units will still do a lot due to their bonus attack speed. Caitlyn especially gets free AD from 8-bit as well. But don't worry if you don't stack 8-bit in the early game, because in the late game it's really easy to stack it up. The combats will be lasting quite a while because your board is just so tanky, and units like ksante and Caitlyn are dealing so much burst damage that you can easily cross multiple high score thresholds in a single combat. Caitlyn and Ezreal feel really good on this board, and that's because this board doesn't really have any backline access, so other units like Samira or Vex can outscale your board and slaughter your frontline. That's why I think you either need Caitlyn or Ezreal with ksante reroll. I mean, you can easily play both if you want to, because they will be super safe in the backline. Of course, with a full AD board, you will need some armor reduction. I usually prefer Evan Shroud on another Sentinel like Blitz or Echo since it will live for so long. But you can also have Last Whisper on Ezreal since his third cast is AoE and it will shred multiple units armor. The same applies to Caitlyn or Lucian. Their ults can hit multiple targets so you can shred as many units as possible, which is generally useful for this board. But now you may be thinking, goody, these boards are kind of expensive. You're expecting me to reroll and hit all of this board and then go level 9? And to that I'd say ksante has another trait that you'd find very helpful, and that is Heartsteel. Even if you only play it for a few cash outs, Heartsteel can supplement your econ and help you recover after rolling down or when trying to reach level 9 to find more expensive carries like Ezreal, Caitlyn or even Lucian. So keep your options open and tech Heartsteel in, as econ is very important on this board, because you will need to be able to field 9 units to maximize this board's potential. Also, in the early game, Aphelios is actually a really reliable carry due to his insane 725% AD ratio on his ult. Likewise, do not underestimate the power of Senna, especially with true damage. Aphelios and Senna punch well above their weight and deal so much damage in the early and mid game. But remember that due to his itemization, ksante really wants at least 6 Sentinel to be relevant in the late game. The difference between 4 and 6 Sentinel is almost double, and that tankiness is really impactful at 6. But before I mention the last and best comp, we should go over who your headliner is on these boards. Of course, you'd think that since your carry is ksante and you're going for ksante 3, then he should be your headliner, right? And that's where you'd be wrong. I had the same thought myself until I looked at the headliner bonus for ksante and compared it to the other Sentinel headliners. I mean, Garen straight up almost gets double the HP from the headliner bonus despite being a more expensive unit. Likewise, Echo almost gets the same amount of HP but then also gets some AP on top. So I don't think a headliner ksante is worth it, especially since a different Sentinel headliner like Garen, Echo or Blitz is far better and brings more value to your board. Also, ksante is a very contested unit in the early game due to Heartsteel enjoyers, so it can be difficult to find him as a headliner. From my games on stream, it was easier to 3-star ksante than find a headliner copy of him, and that's because players have already taken enough copies out of the pool to make it impossible for ksante to appear as a headliner. And this turned out to be better for me because then I could just itemize any copy of ksante and I didn't need to worry about moving items to a headliner copy. And even if you find ksante free really late into the game, that's not really a problem because only his damage reduction scales with star level. But that's not to say that 3-starring ksante isn't important. Ksante's base AD increases with star level, which is further increased by his items and then substantially multiplied by that juicy 800% AD ratio on his ults. Also, getting that 3-star damage reduction is important in the late game to increase Ksante's survivability. But back to the main topic, if ksante isn't your headliner, then who is? Well, I personally think it's another Sentinel so you can keep the option of getting 8 Sentinel open. But you could also keep your headliner flexible and open until the late game, and at that point you could go for a headliner Caitlyn, Ezreal or Blitzcrank. This would allow you to have a far more reliable late game and capitalize on your flexibility around these powerful headliner units. And that brings me to the strongest ksante reroll comp, which also incorporates the Garen reroll comp I also did a video on. In this comp, you have a headliner Sentinel Garen, and then you also have a ksante free and a strong backline that cleans everything else up. This comp is amazing because Garen and ksante can do everything. Tank, scale, sustain, and deal damage. When I play this comp, I roll at level 5 as it has the middle ground odds between 1 and 2 costs. But if you're aiming to play this comp, I would recommend a reroll augment as that can save loads of gold and effort. But again, if you hit ksante 3 and not Garen 3, then you can keep your headliner open until the late game and go for a different Sentinel headliner like Blitz or Echo, or go for a carry headliner like Caitlyn or Ezreal. Lastly, I'll briefly mention some augments that are instant picks. Firstly, healing orbs is insane because that healing keeps your frontline topped up and tanking. ksante especially can become unstoppable with this augment as he has to tank so much damage to lose that HP again. In a similar vein, Combat Caster is great for ksante due to how often he is ulting. Of course, Omnivamp augments like Harm Assist are great too, so ksante can heal even more from his insane burst damage, and your backline can sustain themselves. Also, item augments like Idealism are great too because you get a free Hodge and a great damage amplifier for your board. But Gargantuan Resolve is far better because a single Titans on ksante will now be enough to give him 80 AP, and this frees up your item options on ksante. You could go for more tankiness, sustain, or damage with items like Steadfast Heart, Bloodthirster, or Deathblade respectively, and Indomitable Will can make ksante permanently immune to CC. But yeah, that should mostly cover how to play ksante reroll. I've had a blast playing this comp, so I hope you have just as much fun if you try this comp. Also, I find it really funny that my only 2 reroll guides this set have coincided into the same comp. It's starting to make me think that I'm assembling the pieces of Exodia in this comp. Anyway, it's a TFT convention to name your comps, but I've never done that before, so I'd like to ask you guys for names for this comp and the other comps I've made this set. What I've thought of so far is clapping ksante and Gigabyte Garen, but I'm not sure. But yeah, now I'll pass it over to you guys. What do you think of ksante reroll? If you tried it, did you have as much fun as I did? And lastly, did I prove Mortdog wrong with AD ksante? Let me know in the comments, and remember to subscribe. Anyway, check out these other videos if you want to see more from me, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.